start growing.
Please join me in welcoming our friend Jim Bankoff, CEO of Vox Media. Well, thank you very much, Jim, for coming here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no
Thanks
problem.
for the pizza, and it's great to see so many DC Mid-Atlantic entrepreneurs in the house tonight.
Great.
Congratulations on starting something up.
So, usually we usually like to start our fireside chat on a personal note. So, if you can talk about where you grew up.
Sure.
What did your parents do? Where did you graduate? Where did you get your MBA? It's probably
Sure.
important too.
Yeah, it's a good question. No one's ever asked me that in one of these discussions, so it's smart though, because I'm thinking about my dad. Is an entrepreneur, obviously well before the internet, but he was into jewelry. He still is, thankfully alive and in the jewelry business, and really taught me by example everything I think I needed to know about just grinding it out and being an entrepreneur, and both the positive and the negative that comes along with that. So I grew up mainly in New York and New Jersey, moved around a little bit, and then attended undergrad at Emory University, got my MBA at Wharton, and then had a few different internships and early stage jobs. In fact, one of my first full-time job was a block from here, working for a lobbying communication firm. And then I decided I didn't want to do that for the rest of my life. That's when I went back to business school and then joined AOL while I was in business school.
Great. Actually, you're the second guest that actually graduated from Wharton. We had Nigel Morris of Capital One.
Excellent. Well,
Yeah.
Hopefully I'll have his level of success too.
But he liked Philly, though. Did you like Philly?
I love Philly.
Really?
Philly is awesome. Yeah. I mean, I'm not living there, but it was a great 2 years, and had a lot of fun. Philly has a lot of flavor, a lot of great neighborhoods, a lot of great food, that kind of stuff. So
Nice.
It was fun.
Cool. So you like Philly better than DC, or
I
vice
wouldn't
versa?
go that far. But
Okay.
Philly
Just
has
checking.
its-
Just checking.
Philly-
We're doing
Philly
a check
has
here.
its own charms. You
Okay.
know?
Well,
DC,
Ginos. That's really
DC is
good.
a little more global and international, and has its own things going for it. But Philly's got spunk.
God, Rocky. All right. But before we go into the Vox Media story, I wanted to get right into, when you were president of Netscape, AOL, but kind of after that, when you were EVP, of AOL, you had developed, acquired, and grew world-class consumer web sites such as AIM, Movie Phone, TMZ, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
AOL Music, Userplane, and Gadget. So if you can kind of give us the lessons you learned from those companies, and how did it give you a leg up in running Vox Media to become a world-class property?
Well, sure. I have a lot of great people who work with me now, and I joke around I have one of the less diverse careers out of all the great people I work with, in that I've always, other than that quick stint that I mentioned here, I've always been doing online content for my whole career, and that's changed a lot because I'm obviously, I think I've been doing online content as long as there has been online content. So it's changed, but I've always been doing that one thing. And when I first joined AOL, I was never on the ISP side of the business, so I never shipped out a disc. And those of you who are old enough to remember, that was AOL's primary business. I was always the guy who was trying to find things for people to do once they got online. And in the beginning, there wasn't even a broader internet, so we would finance companies, a lot of them local, like the Motley Fool, which is still going really strong, and someone else that you can invite on.
Oh, yes, I was going to say, yeah. You can invite
Because they have a great business, big building out in Alexandria, but when they were first getting started, there was no web, and so they had to do a deal with AOL to get audience, and that's how they started up. So I started off my career companies like that and companies like iVillage, and then as that grew, fast forward to 2004, when I was on the sidelines saying, guys, this ISP business, let's face it, it's going away. And if you want to transition AOL, we have to make it into a media company. And eventually everyone kind of understood that, but it was, some senses, too little too late. AOL didn't have a technology platform. It wasn't even publishing in HTML. We had this system called Rain Man, which, for those of you who are old enough to remember, these little form-driven objects that were on the computer screen. So we didn't have an open web standard. We didn't have any real claim to be a media company. And so a lot of the things that you mentioned were born out of necessity to try to jumpstart our media business. So we would acquire companies. That's how we acquired Userplane. We acquired Weblogs Inc., which had brands like Engadget. We started things like TMZ. We acquired more things.
You started TMZ?
I co-founded it with some partners out at Warner Brothers. And then one of my themes for tonight is going to be just how important talent is. And while we hatched the idea, the first thing we did was hire some great people who actually made it what it was. So even though we hatched it, I always give credit to guys like Harvey Levin, who you might know from the TV show, who's he's really the creative force behind it and deserves the credit. But yeah, we started it up, and and it blew up. And I translate some of those themes that I learned there are certainly extraordinarily relevant for what we're doing today at Vox Media.
So that's actually quite interesting that you talk about Weblog Inc. because I wanted to talk about how you were able to reconcile the differences in company culture. So have you seen that Wall Street Journal article about Weblog with Jason Calacanis, right?
I probably have. I think I've seen everything.
Okay, so all things D, they had mentioned that the art of the acquisition. So and then obviously you're the big M&A guru, and basically the title of this article said "Leave it alone," and you were known to leave your acquirees alone, sort of giving them a long leash. And so in your experience, have you noticed, especially when an acquiree goes into the bigger company, have you noticed that the acquiree changes the acquirer's DNA? Has that ever happened?
It happens. Well, they certainly attempt to change the DNA. I don't know if you can fully, but there are examples of it happening successfully. For instance, probably everyone who lives in this area is very familiar with Ted Leonsis, who's a good friend of mine. He was my boss and mentor, and still is a very close friend. He's kind of synonymous with building up AOL. I mean, he's synonymous with AOL, right, in this area certainly, and now he's synonymous with his sports teams and other ventures. But his company was acquired by AOL, and Steve Case acquired Ted's company, which was called Redgate. And a few years later, they were joking around how actually Little Redgate wound up acquiring AOL, because that was an instance of where the smaller acquired company influenced the DNA of the larger company. And so that will probably go down as one of the most successful small mergers of tech history, probably, in that a smaller company was able to use the executive talent and the know-how to help grow the bigger company. And so that's an example of where the DNA could be shifted. Having said that, there are far more examples of where it falls apart, and where it either falls apart via hubris or misunderstanding or whatever. And so I think the art is really understanding why you're acquiring a company, having very clear expectations with the entrepreneurs and with the teams going into it. And there could be different things. Sometimes it is right just to leave it alone, but other times you're buying it because you want them to have a positive influence on you, and if you leave them too far separated, that influence isn't going to happen. So you have to really understand why you're in it and really be upfront and have really strong conversations and get both sides excited about it.
So that's a really good answer. But so what is your opinion about the Yahoo acquisition of Tumblr?
My opinion is, I'll start off by saying no more informed than any of yours. I read the same things that you read probably, and those of you who even care about it. And but
that's my phone, sorry.
I like that ringtone, by the way. I might call you, Brian, just so I can hear some Aerosmith.
Sorry about that. Tumblr, yes.
I think, I think it's a great acquisition, to be honest. And, if you're Yahoo and you're trying to shake up your business, I think Marissa Mayer is proving herself to be a great CEO, and she's making some bold and aggressive moves. They have plenty of cash on their balance sheet to take a risk like this. They want an asset that has scale. It might not have the revenue scale, but it certainly has the user scale. And they're looking for a platform. So I think, you know, it's a risk. It's not, you know, it's a roll of the dice, but I think it's a reasonably measured one, and it's probably less risky than not doing anything.
Yeah, I mean, so the thing is that I have, one of the struggles I have with an acquisition like that is really brand integrity. So how does Yahoo maintain the brand integrity of Tumblr without compromising their own brand? So.
Yeah, as I understand it, this was a case where they're not going to change the brand. You know, there might be a little like thing on the bottom that for legal reasons, but beyond that, they're not going to change too much. And I think the integration points are going to be ones that hopefully will be invisible to the consumer, but will still be helpful for Yahoo's business. So specifically, how do they leverage the data that's coming off of Tumblr to create more targeted ad networks? How do they sell the advertising in a more powerful way? That, you know, will have some sort of impact on the consumer, but Tumblr was going to have to start, you know, monetizing their asset at some point anyway, and maybe Yahoo can do it in a more elegant and more powerful way. So, you know, there certainly will be changes, but I think hopefully those changes won't interfere with the core experience and the reason why people love it so much to begin with.
Okay, cool, good answer. So as a former EVP of AOL,
Ooh.
okay, and you were the EVP.
I'm now a CEO.
I know, you're CEO.
So
right?
are you guys.
That's right, man.
We're all
so,
CEOs.
Yeah, exactly. So you were EVP of programming and products, and I used to work for AOL, and you were like my boss's 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 boss. I mean, seriously. So I'm so glad I'm talking to you now, 10 years later. So my question to you is that, because I knew that there were, I mean, you have all these web properties. You got AOL.com, you got MapQuest, you got Movie Phone, AOL Music, you know, Netscape, AOL Instant Messenger, TMZ, Fan House, blogging stocks, Engadget. So my question to you is, you know, it's kind of like, what was your favorite web property? I mean, I know it's kind of like asking a father who's your favorite child, but you know, what was your favorite web property?
I probably could answer this one because
Sure.
I mean they were all great, but you know the ones that I took most personal pride in were the ones that I had a hand in building. And you know, and when you put it that way, it's like I'm proud of, you know, managing a great team at AOL, but when you have such a large organization, your responsibilities are such that you can't be as hands-on with the products as you want to be. You know, like I missed that, and you know, it was a blessing to have such a great job and experience so much. But one of the frustrations of the job is like you have responsibilities as a leader, and those responsibilities as a leader are to empower other people and not to like tinker in designing a product or something like that. And that's, you know, that's people who work with you, it's their job. And so, you know, first of all, that's one of the great things about managing a startup is like, even though you might not have some of the perks of like running a big company, you know, you get that thrill of where your every decision has an impact. And, you know, don't lose sight of that as you strive to be bigger, because it's, you know, it's great. And like, hopefully you'll find a way to maintain that without being a micromanager and find a way to empower people in the same way that you're currently empowered. That's one of the big lessons. But, you know, to answer your question, the ones that I worked on directly, like TMC, for instance, where I was like, you know, involved in the creation and the growth of it. There were other ones too, like, you know, Fan House, the AOL sports venture, you know, where we had a great guy named Jamie Mottram who really, he's now at USA Today, but he, you know, that was really his brainchild along with a bunch of other people, but at least I was a little closer to that. Whereas, you know, the acquisitions were great too, and we did some turnarounds on them and some other things, but I always personally liked the ones where I had a hand in building them.
Okay, so we're going to go straight to the Vox Media story. That's why everyone's here. So kind of step us through.
I thought they were here for the pizza.
For the pizza, yeah. No, actually, they're here for the water. So step us through the story of how Vox Media started. How did it come to be? Who are the original founders? When did they decide to bring a seasoned CEO? and replace themselves. So let's talk about that.
So Vox Media started as SB Nation, and you did a good job of introing us. But SB Nation, Vox has now 3 consumer verticals: one in sports with SB Nation, one in tech culture with The Verge, and one in games with Polygon. And but we started out as SB Nation, and the founders were the main founder is a guy who I still work with named Tyler Blazinski. He's our editorial director on our sports side. He and a partner / friend of his, Marcos Muslitsis, and then a third guy who's local here, Jerome Armstrong, got together. Marcos and Jerome basically financed Tyler, made it possible for him to quit his day job and work on this thing. They then brought in some smart technologists on a consulting basis, and the main guy, a bunch of them are still with our company. The main guy is a guy named Trey Brundrett, who's still our chief product officer. And they got going on this. They knew of my reputation from AOL, where I was doing some similar things with Weblogs Inc. I left AOL at the end of 2006. I was working for a private equity firm, but I was really interested in startups. To me, like, one of the great things about startups now, when I got out of business school, everyone's aspiration was to like go work for a big company and run a big company someday. Now, like, people getting out of school, like, their aspiration is to work for something small. And so, the tide was changing. I wanted to work for something smaller. These guys and I got to know one another. They did, first I spent a long time, we had a courtship for a long time where I was helping them informally, and then I was helping them a little more formally, and then they asked me to join their board, and then they asked me to help them raise money. And once we raised the money, they and the first VC that backed us asked me to run the company. And by that point, I had gotten to know the company so well, I just fell in love with it.
Actually, so I want to get some clarification on this. So, like, were they in kind of like in the seed phase?
That's right.
So they had a full-time job, and then you were working for AOL, and
I had left AOL by that point, but I was consulting for this private equity firm.
Oh, right.
And they actually brought me in for advice, but then they asked me to seed. And I believe I didn't, I don't have the kind of money where I can like make a lot of these personal investments, but I believed in them so much that I put a little of my own money into it, and that money quickly evaporated, which really motivated me to help them raise money. Because my wife was like, "What happened to that investment that we made?" Because it's her money too, and I had to account for that money, and I had to wind up running the company so I could get that money back. But it's all worked out.
It's funny how you had a co-CEO like all of a sudden, right? I mean,
right.
Well, my wife tells me, she tells that to me all the time.
She's at least my venture capital.
Exactly. So that's cool. So I wanted to talk about because you've had experience in this whole M&A sphere, and my question to you is: so there's a lot of founders here. So how many founders do we have here of startups? Okay, so that's probably 70% of the room. When we get to the seed stage, obviously, you're trying to find a product market fit. You go to Series A, you're trying to scale the company. Then, because scaling entails a lot of things, meaning, hey, including you're not the right person to run this company now. When do you think what are some of the signs of a founder that I should say, hey, I need to step down and bring in a seasoned CEO to run this startup? What are some of the signs that you've seen?
In our case, Tyler, who I mentioned, was our founder, and he's such a great guy, and so both self-aware and so smart. And I think we're like a case study for bringing in me from the outside. Now we were at that point we were only like seed, so it wasn't like we were well down the road and a new CEO came in, but still, it was a transition. And I think for his part, what I know he said about me is that I understood the vision that he had, and I could follow through on it and maybe do it on a level that he had not yet experienced. I can bring something to the table to complement him and something to drive his business forward more. And there's not one easy answer to your question. I think maybe generally speaking, though, it'd be like where you feel as though your skills, talent, abilities have hit a limit on where they need to be in order to take your pride and joy to the next level. And that's a very difficult thing to grapple with, because it is yours. It came, from your mind and your sweat. And to bring someone in to assist you to get to the next level is a very difficult thing. And you have to choose wisely, and then you have to find that right balance between empowering the person, but also sticking with them to make sure that your vision is realized, even if that means some pivoting and adapting of that vision along the way.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the examples that comes to mind is obviously, Tumblr, because I've met David Karp a couple of times, and when he had brought in the CEO, I think it was Donahue. Anyways,
right.
or Mahoney.
Yeah.
So he's like this 50-year-old guy running Tumblr, which is primarily, the 20s,
Yeah.
folks that are like in high school and in their 20s. And so like when he had made that decision to step down and bring in a seasoned CEO, it had a lot of people scratching their heads.
Yeah. Or the reverse is the most famous one. Is Mark not stepping down, but bringing in Cheryl to help him with Facebook, and that's another way of doing it. Where if you can find a solid partner to complement you, you can do it that way too. Sometimes that's possible, sometimes it's not. But I think in both of those cases, the idea was one person will focus on the product. In David's case and in Mark's case, they're product visionaries. They wanted to stay close to the product. They didn't want to bother only with important things like the business model at the time at least, and scaling an organization, HR, finance, investor relations, all those kind of things that take up time during the day and are critical, of course. So they had to find partners to help them, and it's smart. And everyone needs partners, whether or not you're a founder. I have one of your former bosses, a guy named Marty Moe is now our COO, and he helps me a lot. Trey Brundret's our chief product officer, and so the key thing is a lot of times people start their own businesses because they want to see things done their own way. That's critical. That's what vision is. Passion of a founder is what gets the company off the ground and what guides it forward for its life. But don't confuse that with having to do it all yourself, or thinking that you can do it all yourself as you scale, because that takes it from visionary into megalomania, and you have to know where one ends and the other begins, and just be careful. And if you really love your creation, treat it right and get it the care that it deserves.
Great. Vox Media is the fastest growing publisher company according to comScore. 60 million monthly uniques. But it's more now?
60 million Google Analytics, and I think comScore has it at 20 or something.
20. Oh, we had Dr. Majid as our guest.
Oh, did you?
comScore. We'll do a.
With him, but
Oh, you do? Okay.
Some other time.
So talk about the the 3 web properties. You're able to become one of the fastest growing properties with really 2 of them, right? SB Nation and the Verge. But
Polygon is now the fastest growing video game property. It's only 6 months old.
Okay.
We had a killer week last week with E3 games coverage, and if any of you care at all about video games or game culture, it's an awesome site. It's beautifully designed too, and it's just shooting up the charts. So anyway, all 3.
Okay, well, I stand corrected. Okay, great.
Huge.
So tell us, let's get right to the bottom. What are the techniques where you how you gain all this traction? So without spilling the beans.
Yeah, I'm
Can you
happy
give us a little bit of secret sauce
fully,
here?
Happy to be fully transparent. I mean, I will say we started this up, now 5 years ago, and a lot of the things that made us able to scale are now very well known, and so they're not secrets. In fact, they're obvious. Things but if you think about it, starting a media brand from scratch 5 years ago was a hard thing to do, and 10 years ago was impossible to do. You think about the media landscape; it was dominated by local market monopolies or national monopolies that could afford a heavy fixed infrastructure cost, whether it was a printing press like across the street, or whether it was a radio tower or a TV tower, or some other like big cost investment to enable you to distribute trucks, whatever, and then you had to invest a lot in marketing that new brand so that someone would have heard of it. The internet came along and leveled the playing field. That was the good part and the bad part. It leveled the playing field such that any of us could compete, and it leveled the playing field such that any of us could compete. So we have a lot of competition now, and it makes it tougher. Like we were starting off at a part where it was a little bit easier to break through, and we can use new avenues like social distribution, or even search engine optimization, or even business development partnerships and grassroots affiliations to like grow our brands. But really, what it boiled down to was the fact that we made a product that people loved. In the case of the sports sites, we went after a passionate fan. We had a strategy that the bigger guys weren't doing. That's another obvious but important piece of advice, is that copycat strategies aren't going to cut it, in my opinion, for entrepreneurs. And I'm not saying that like in a high or mighty way, just in a kind of obvious way that if a bigger company is doing something already, why would a smaller company be successful in like doing the same strategy as them? So in our case, sports, for example, there were a lot of national players out there, ESPN, CBS Sports, Sports Illustrated, et cetera, that were doing just fine. And instead of just trying to go after them in the national space, we looked around and said, well, no one's really doing teams well. The teams themselves had websites, but the teams couldn't write critically about their websites. They couldn't have honest dialogue. So fans wanted more. Fans didn't want to just go to a place to read the propaganda or to buy a ticket. They wanted a place where they could really talk about their team and build culture around their team. And that's how we got started, offering something different on that level. We then, we had built up technology to support that. Another way that we got a leg up was building our own proprietary technology platform. We call it Chorus. It started off as a CMS, but really evolved into a modern media platform, much in the same way that Tumblr or WordPress are platforms. Ours is a platform like that too. Probably, even more powerful than WordPress. It's just we use it for our own internal uses to build media brands. And once sports really grew up, we realized that we had a lot of leverage in this technology platform asset, and that's when we determined, hey, we can do more than just sports. That's when we got into the Verge. That's when we got into Polygon. But the point is that, one, find something that no one else is doing. Two, use the obvious, ways to build a company on the web that I think are, everyone knows these days. And then three, when you do start to get a little bit of traction, understand what your real assets are and how you can leverage them. We had a lot of good conversations internally. Are we a sports company or are we a modern publishing company? And ultimately, the answer for us was we were a modern publishing company that publishes sports and can publish other things. And as your company grows, sometimes people call it pivoting or whatever, but that's sometimes dismissive. That's a way of saying I failed and I'm trying something new. Oftentimes, like really understanding, even though it's not what you intended, you have something special going on. Really understanding what that is and being able to invest in that also helps.
Okay, great. So we had talked about traction. Now with all this traction, let's talk about the monetization aspect of this and this whole new media. Do you think that the best days for publishers are behind them, or do you think they're ahead of them? In terms of monetization, obviously.
I think for some publishers, they're behind, and some publishers, they're ahead. And the difference is, are you embracing all these things about digital, and can you get out of your way and execute against them? And say that last part because I think we're at a stage now where, I honestly think 5-10 years ago, there were a lot of like just big dumb media companies out there that weren't embracing digital, didn't understand what it meant. We're beyond that now. It's like they get the joke, and like they're not stupid, and you can't like make fun of them anymore. It's just that they are still bogged down in cultures and business model legacies that are hard to escape. and maybe for very legitimate reasons, like they make a lot of money from them and they have shareholders that they have to satisfy, and so they can't just write off something that makes a lot of money on the speculative promise of something that isn't going to make a lot of money for them necessarily. And so there's good reasons why they can't embrace it. And I think, unfortunately, for publishers like that, they're kind of caught in this slow death spiral that might accelerate depending on what form of media it is. You know, newspapers, magazines, faster than TV networks, but it's all kind of going in that direction. There's a new breed of publishers, you know, I think we're amongst them, that are, you know, doing things in a thoroughly modern way, using technology, finding great web talent, and trying to do things in a high quality way. And, you know, knock wood, I think, you know, we're onto something. We're not alone, and I think there will be a lot of publishers and a lot of platforms that prosper.
Okay. I mean, I don't know if you noticed, but we're right across from the Washington Post, right?
I am.
Okay, yeah.
I hope they can't hear me.
Yeah, I was serious. I was like,
turn up that mic too loud. I have a lot of respect for the Washington, who can't, you know, you know, obviously have a storied history, but to this day, they're, you know, they're a critical journalistic entity, and so I am cheering for them. It's just, as I said, it's hard, and I know a lot of the people who work across the street, and I have utmost respect for them. They're smart people. They might even, you know more than I do or more than anyone on our team does, but as I said, it's still hard to do anything about it because you're kind of trapped in this business model and cultural paradigm that for very good structural reasons is difficult to bust out of.
Okay, so I want to now talk about, so along with this monetization in new media, because eventually, I think this would be a good segue to your new product from Vox, and I'll let you talk about it more. But before we get there, I had heard you speak at TechCrunch Disrupt and also at GigaOM, and it really struck me when you had talked about just advertisement. So the top of the funnel of creative advertisement, and you had made this illustration like, here you have this $250 billion industry worldwide, all-inclusive advertisement, and you said that 60 to 65% is all brand building.
Yeah. So
that's interesting. And then you had mentioned that the internet, which is kind of like on the bottom of the funnel, $25 billion, 80% goes to direct response.
Yeah, you took good notes.
Yeah, I know. I just
you know, for those of you who are, you know, I know there's a variety of different businesses, but like for those of you who aren't familiar with the advertising business, what that means is the internet is awesome for selling us stuff. Like, you know, when you're in the market to buy something, you type it into Google, you find the ad word. That's great. I mean, that's what made the internet what it is. Or when you're surfing on a website and one of those ads, like they know that you've been shopping at Expedia, and so you'll get the Expedia ad on whatever site you're on. Again, like they know you're in market for something, they want to sell it to you right there. But well before you can sell something to someone, you have to build awareness of the thing, and you have to create a brand perception of the thing. Like, you know, before you're in the market to buy a car or even a soft drink or even a hamburger, you know, marketers do their job of telling you stories and creating awareness for their products and creating perception. You know, it's just a hamburger, yet we view different hamburgers with different traits because of the marketing behind them. And so the web has not really focused on that. In marketing speak, it's the top of the funnel. The web has done really well at the bottom of the funnel, but most marketing in the real world outside of the internet is spent on creating brand awareness. And one of the things we're trying to do is appeal to those types of marketers that are looking to do that on the web. And it goes, you know, further just to say that as people, you know, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your worldview, stop reading magazines and newspapers, and as their broadcast viewing habits are fragmented, marketers have a real problem. I often say, you know, the marketers don't do us any favors when they spend money with us. They have a problem to solve because it's harder for them to create this brand awareness when we as consumers are no longer spending time with these same media properties that we used to, and we're shifting all of our time to the web. They have to figure out solutions on the web that are not just Google AdWords and not just low-value ad networks, but that are actually, you know, engaging and strong brand-building tactics. So that's what we're trying to help them with.
Okay, so let's talk about Vox Creative,
Oh.
because that's exactly what it is.
Good
I mean, it's a good
segue,
segue, right? I mean, how I understand Vox Creative is it's really ultimately brands connecting with audience in meaningful ways. And so I know you don't believe in sponsor posts.
Yeah, what we don't
No?
what we don't believe in is like tricking consumers
Right.
into thinking that they're reading, something that our writers wrote involuntarily. Like that, we don't believe in deceiving people. But what we do believe in is that brands have a story to tell, and we have Vox Creative is a unit that we established to help them tell those stories. And if you think about it, if you're a marketer, let's say you are, you make cereal or something like that. You want to tell a story about that cereal. Our cereal is awesome, and athletes love to eat our cereal because it makes them strong and good looking. And and so historically you would have done that on television. Well, now as media fragments, you need to tell stories to the audience that is now on digital. Yet that's a hard thing to do. And you have an agency, and the agency has certain things that they do well. But one of the things that we have spent a lot of time and capital on is figuring out how to tell stories to digital audiences. We do it for our content brands. Marketers do it as well. We communicate with an audience, as The Verge communicates with an audience every day. And if you're a marketer, increasingly you want to communicate with a digital audience every day. And so we thought to ourselves, why not make available the same tools and creative process that we use internally and make that available for marketers who are looking to do the exact same thing. And those tools include our video studio, where we can make broadcast quality video at a fraction of the cost. Those tools include our technology platform, Chorus, that enables you to have analytics and metrics and publishing mechanisms and all sorts of newsroom management. And those tools include other things too, like the ability to kind of work with social media and other things. So all those capabilities, all those platforms that we have are now available to marketers as well, and that's what Vox Creative is.
Okay, because like when I heard you explain that before, I was still somewhat confused. So I actually wrote an actual example. So I mean, you use this serial example, but let's do something more a little pertinent.
Sure.
Here, Under Armour.
Under Armour
is here in Baltimore, and it's
sure.
probably somebody, or even the CMO of the Washington Capitals, right?
Yeah.
Which actually he is here. But anyways, so if I wanted to sell tickets, I want to sell more tickets. How would I use Vox Creative? If I'm Washington
so
Capitals?
again, that's a good, and that particular way you phrase that, like, how do I sell more tickets? If your goal is to sell more tickets tonight, where are you, CMO? I wouldn't, I would say there are more effective direct response techniques for doing that. That's where, I'd say, there are flash sales, go work with Groupon or Living Social to like sell your tickets tonight, because that's what they specialize in. If I want to, have a campaign though for the Washington Capitals that gets more people in DC or even around the country or the world excited about the Washington Capitals brand and builds a sense of excitement about the team upcoming, maybe with the goal to sell more season tickets and sell more merchandise and get prime the pump for all sorts of sales. Then I would work with Vox Media to say, hey, let's create a campaign. Maybe it's a video-based campaign, maybe it's a whole website campaign that talks about the excitement and the passion around the Washington Capitals and the Washington Capitals fans. It really gives people a taste of everything that's going on and why you want to be a part of it, and leaves that impression in your mind that you need to be part of it, such that when you do hit them up with a buy now thing on Groupon or on an AdWords or wherever it is, you've left them with that impression like, wow, I got to go buy that ticket because this is an exciting team. This is a movement that I want to be part of.
Well, because you mentioned like videos, like studios. I mean, does that also include?
It does. Let's cut a video. Let's create a website. Let's create an interactive series. Let's create an interactive poll. Let's do a fan meetup. It could be a whole bunch of things online and offline that combine the two. A relevant, a real life example that we worked on is with Ford, and Ford spends probably over $1 billion getting people who are in market to buy Ford cars. That's critical for them to do. They work with Auto Trader, they work with their dealers, and they do that very well. But well before they do that, they have to create an image of Ford. And one of the things that we could help them with is making Ford into, Ford has a lot of great technology products, and you don't often think of Ford as a technology company, but they have Sync, and they have a lot of eco things that are, helping the cars get better fuel economy and less emissions and all that stuff. And no one really knew that, and they wanted to get in front of a tech-savvy audience to really tell their technology story. We have the Verge, and even our sports properties, for that matter, have a really tech-savvy audience that they were looking to attract. So we not only put the messages in front of those audiences and measured it, but we also helped them create series that talked about these virtues. And then we also worked with them. They were our lead sponsor at CES. And how often do you think about a car company sponsoring a technology conference? But once you start to think about that, you think to yourself, oh, wait a second, Ford is sponsoring a technology coverage. Ford must be a technology company, and you might not think that immediately, but over time you build that impression. And I think companies that embrace digital branding like that are smart for that reason.
I'd like to switch gears here a little bit and talk about mobile. So the mobile strategy. I've heard this phrase, but we're going from dollar in print to dimes in the web to pennies on mobile. How will this shift affect players like Vox Media as like readership becomes increasingly mobile? I mean, how you guys?
Yeah, well, I'm hoping I'm hoping that is the dollars to penny or the dimes to pennies is hopefully a temporal kind of setup. Part of why that's the case is that marketers haven't yet figured out mobile advertising themselves. They don't even have mobile websites yet. A lot of big publications are just starting to have mobile websites, and usually it goes, the publications have to, and then the marketers will over time. And so, I think this is going to be a very powerful way to market to people, and so I do think the dollars will be there. And
you think it's going to dollars to mobile? Do you think that will be the trend?
Yeah, I mean, I think, let's put it this way. I think the economics of mobile advertising will be able to support great mobile content. You'll be able to make a business model out of it for sure. And you're already seeing it with companies like Flipboard and Zeit and other kind of mobile first kind of entities that are making big, beautiful display ads. For our part, one of the things we did to get ahead of it was embrace adaptive responsive design, so that whether you're on SB Nation or Polygon, the experience across different platforms, tablet, phone, desktop, it's a consistent experience that is optimized in its form and UI for whatever you're on, but is the same experience, fundamentally, same photo imagery, just optimized for the platform. And so that way, for both consumers who are engaging in our content and brands that are partnering with us, they don't have to think about oh, am I getting your audience on the phone? Am I getting your audience on the desktop? The truth is, those of us who are work in front of a computer all day and then have our iPads when we get home and our mobile on the way to work or wherever, they want to target us. They don't necessarily always care what device we're on. So we try to make it as easy as possible for them just to say, all right, if you buy SB Nation, you're going to get the SB Nation audience wherever they are. If they're on a bus or if they're at work or if they're at home reading something longer.
What kind of trends are you seeing on SB Nation in the perspective of mobile? I mean, do you see a lot of users on the mobile?
I think everyone is seeing that growth. I think we're close to 40% mobile now, and that was up from maybe 25 a year ago. And I think I've asked around a lot of other publishers. I think we're pretty consistent with everyone. We might be a little bit more mobile just because in sports in particular, it's, you know, it's a pretty mobile audience. You're watching a game, you want to get information or whatever. So or a lot of it takes place on the weekends. But I think we're pretty consistent with everyone else.
Okay, cool. Before I open up Q&A to the audience, I want to talk about one last topic, and that's the DC startup ecosystem. What are some of the benefits for Vox Media being here in DC versus New York or Silicon Valley? I mean, you've been here many, many decades, so you're probably the best person to answer this.
I love DC, and I'm so glad to be here. I'm so glad that you all are here, and you know, I'm like committed professionally and personally to trying to make this a better place for more startups to blossom. There's only so much that I can do, you know, like, you know, trying to come and be supportive tonight, but other things as well. But I think it's a great place. You know, as I said to kick off when you asked me about Philadelphia, I mean, DC has a lot of things going for it. It has, you know, it's an international city. It's a city with a big entrenched industry with that, you know, is a big customer base, namely the federal government there. And, you know, and I realize we're not all in those kinds of businesses, but it's important because it gives the city an economic foundation for sure, even if you're not selling directly into the federal government. And then, you know, there are educational institutions that could provide great technology talent, and you know, there's a lot of things going for it. It's a young city. There are people always coming in from all sorts of different places. So it has a lot of things going for it, and you know, it doesn't obviously have the same built-in ecosystem as Silicon Valley. It doesn't have the same, you know, thing. It's not as big as New York. There's no denying that. And so, you know, as we've grown, we've established offices in other places too. We have a big office in New York. We have satellite offices in Chicago and San Francisco, and even a small office in Austin, Texas. But our headquarters remain here, and we remain committed to it as ever. And you know, I'm not moving anywhere. So like, there's always going to be a presence here for sure.
So one last question. What kind of startups interest you, tickle your fancy? Do you have sort of like, wow, that looks like an interesting startup I'd like to advise? Maybe?
I'm one of those guys who gets interested by a lot of different ideas and, you know, diversity of ideas. But I'm also careful. I'm also careful. I love to, you know, give as much advice as I can. I'm also careful about not like pretending I know it all and you know, trying to give advice where I'm just another voice, because I think as entrepreneurs we have a lot of different voices coming at us, and you know, the key thing is to synthesize that and just make your own decision. And then, you know, my time is pretty strapped too, running my own company, and so I'm happy to always like answer emails and you know, occasionally, you know, do forums like this or grab a coffee or whatever. So any way I can help.
But any interesting startup concepts that interesting?
Probably
No?
not as interesting as the one
in this audience.
Room. Yeah.
Okay. No, we'll have shout outs later. But okay. you have a airplane to catch.
I do. But okay, I have a few minutes for questions.
We're gonna. So we have to be very cognizant of your time. So we'll open up for questions. We'll just start off right now. So let's just go number one here.
Thank you. So you mentioned that E3 gave Polygon a nice boost.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering how you leverage events for your other verticals, or if you have like a general sort of approach or relationship with particular events, and also how you're going to do that with creative, or if you've considered that at all.
All good. You know, events are great marketing vehicles. You know, and you know, I think it's a very insightful question, because like we use events. We invest a lot in them, and just for instance, like we sent a whole crew of reporters, videographers to E3, and to the same week was Apple's WWDC, where they announced all their new products, and we had crews on both locations. We had studio in New York that was, you know, we treat those events like ESPN would treat the Super Bowl, or like CNN would treat a political campaign. You know, for us, that's a place to make our mark. And so you're absolutely right. Like, it's not only editorial coverage, and we find sponsors so we can make some money too, but they're marketing events for us. And the way I look at it is, you know, our traffic for a day like that might double or triple or maybe more. And if we're doing a good job, all we have to do is keep like 5% of that new audience that finds us for a big event day. They come to us and they're like, wow, I was only interested in the E3 coverage, but I'm going to stay because I really like what these guys are doing, and that builds upon itself. And you had another good question about Vox Creative, and that's another service that we can offer to marketers. They often have, you might be a product company that isn't Google or isn't Apple and might not have as much hoopla and fanfare around your launch event, but we can help cover it and help kind of make it into a bigger deal, and then you can spend some advertising dollars on our site and elsewhere to help make consumers more aware of it.
Okay, so if I wanted to sell more Capital Washington Caps tickets, I'll have him ask you directly.
Hey, I was the guy.
There you are.
And thanks for the couple of promotions you gave me with the CMO title. But so talking about, we have something in common. We both worked for Ted in the past. You said you made a decision with SB Nation whether you can be a sports company or a media company. And I think Ted's kind of going through that right now. He has his sports teams, but he really wants to grow it into the media company. What do you think of that strategy, and what do you think of some of the hurdles that he might face going down that direction? I
think he's doing just fine. Ted's a sports owner. I see another sports owner in the back there. Hey, Mark. Sports teams are such a valuable asset in this day and age. I see it from my vantage point as a media company that live sports TV is the ultimate reality programming, and it's something that isn't really great on a DVR and isn't you have to watch it, and it brings us all together, and it's a community experience as a result. So I think Ted's going to have a lot of options. It already is a big media asset in that they partner with Comcast. I know that contract's probably going to be up at some point, and then he'll be able to decide whether he wants to create his own network or partner with them or someone else to do something big. But one way or another, the rights owners are really in the catbird seats, I think, when they want to create something. So I think it already is a media company, and it's probably just going to be a bigger media company.
Jim, I wanted to follow up on Brian's question about New York versus Washington. And in terms of access to talent, which skill sets have you found to be the most difficult to source in this market, either skill sets or functions? And then also in terms of access to money, how would you characterize the VC community here versus New York and San Francisco, and just in terms of how they think?
So in terms of access to talent, it depends what kind of talent you need. We hire both journalistic talent, that's a little bit easier to find, and then technical talent, that's a little bit harder to find. But what I'd say about the technology talent, while it's harder to find, it's easier to retain. So you kind of, you have to work a little harder to recruit and maybe even relocate. But once people are here, they love the lifestyle here. They love the being part of the DC community, and we tend to retain people once they're here because hopefully they love our company, but they also love being in the DC area. So I think that's you can look at that as a hard thing, but also a good thing too. And your other question was about VCs. I'll be direct and say I don't think there's enough VC involvement in DC area companies. I think programs like this hopefully will change that. There are some great VCs in the neighborhood, but they make their investments across the country and not just in this area. Although I think they try to look at this area. I know Ted and Steve through Revolution are committed to this area, and there are other VCs that make investments here. We took our first round of capital from Silicon Valley, though, from Excel Partners. Took our second round from Comcast Ventures, which was in Philadelphia, and then we took our third round from another VC on the West Coast, Coastal Ventures. And so, while I'd like to see DC venture capitalists make more investments here, if they're not investing, then other people will, and that's great, and that's a good thing for everyone, and create more sense of urgency here.
I got a question on knowledge management. You've described your different skill sets, your environment, as well as your products. and knowledge management, it's been around since quite some time, but it's picked up pace in the last 10 years. What can you tell me about that?
Knowledge management?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, it depends on what you mean by it. This might not be answering your question, so just let me know. But the way we think about things is in feedback loops, and we have, I think part of the successes of the company is how tight can you make those feedback loops, and how iterative can you be in order to take advantage of the knowledge that you've learned from them, and then apply it elsewhere. And so, we set up our company in a very agile environment, not just in terms of technology development, which is certainly run through an agile process, but even our editorial processes, even our advertising processes, everything we're trying to make agile, which is to say, launch quickly, have feedback and data collection in process, and to analyze the data, use that data to bring it back to the product cycle, and do that in 2-week cycles as much as you possibly can.
So as a follow-up, just to clarify, what do you see it as like in the past?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's hard to generalize because it depends what your product is. If you're building like a jetliner, you can't, it's a different kind of thing. But for web development, again, I don't want to generalize because there are different products call for different things. But I think for most products, for most web development, I think agile is the way to go.
Okay, 2 more questions.
Okay, I have a question about content. So I have my own media situation, and it's not really getting.
Situation.
It's
You
a
need media
situation because
intervention.
it's been there for a while, but it's not getting any comments, even though we have a lot of traffic. So I'm wondering if maybe one of the reasons is that I'm seeing that a lot of different blogs, like TechDirt or different concepts, they're using a lot of opinionated news instead of investigative stories. So are you seeing a trend with engagement in terms of spinning the content so it's more or less someone else's opinion and giving you the news that way?
If you're looking for engagement on a community level, that's all. You just have to. It doesn't matter so much, I don't think, whether it's breaking news or commentary. You just have to be willing to encourage it and engage with it. Engage with your audience. Talk to your audience. Ask them questions. Respond to the questions. Respond to the answers that they get. Really make an effort. It's been described as think of it as a dinner party or a cocktail party, and just because you're serving great drinks or great food, which is your content, doesn't necessarily mean that you're gonna have a lot of cool people over and you're gonna have a great, amazing conversation. You have to be a great host at the party, and you have to encourage people to bring their dishes and talk about their things and listen to their boring stories if they have boring stories, and pretend that you're interested when they tell you a boring story, and it's all part of being a gracious host, and I think that's probably the way to build community. You definitely have to serve great content, great dishes, but that could take different forms, and it's more about getting out there, making sure that you have broad invitations to your parties through Twitter and through Facebook. I'm using the party analogy here, by the way. It's not a literal party unless you're having a meetup. And so, you have to work hard at building that community and being there day in, day out, and grow it over time. But you can't just post something and expect people to talk about it.
Sure. If you wouldn't mind, could you talk about 1 or 2 of your mistakes and what you learned from them?
Sure. There's a lot, and I do have to catch a plane. But one that jumps to mind is whenever we once we got a little bigger, we tried to maybe jump into a side business maybe and a little too quickly, not give it enough focus. I'll give you an example. With SB Nation, we saw the daily deal trend growing, and this was 3 years ago. And I think like everyone else, we're like, oh, we have sports fans. Let's have daily deals for sports fans. And we started this thing called Team Pick, and we actually got a little bit of traction with it, just enough to be dangerous. But we kind of quickly came to the realization, in order to focus on that business, which is a hard business, just ask Living Social and Groupon, you know, you have to be in that business. You have to be living, breathing it every day. It can't just be a side thing for you. And I think that goes for a lot of different things. Like, you know, the mistakes that we've made have been when we try to go off and do like a side thing that we're not, that isn't in our core of who we are, that, you know, that's just like an experiment that we're not wholly committed to. Because, you know, it's very rare something like that will succeed. Like, you know, if you're going to do something, you got to commit to it. And if it's just like a side project that you have no hope in committing to, then you're probably not going to be successful. And, you know, we've certainly fell into that trap a few times, I think.
Okay, great. We have two last questions. One last question
two
would
more.
be, well, no, I mean, this is for me, so it'll be very
all
short.
right,
So
all right.
we'll make it really quick. But number one is, who's your favorite pick for the NBA Finals?
Man, I want the Spurs to win. Spurs fans? Heat
Crickets.
Fans? This is a Heat audience? Oh my gosh. You all don't look like front runners to me, but I guess. Yeah, I mean, I want, like, I love, you know, Tim Duncan. Like, he goes about his business the way that, like, you know, I would aspire to, which is like, just put it all out there on the court and be a champion and don't talk much about it. And, you know, hopefully he can win another one before he retires.
Yeah, absolutely. I like him because my parents live in San Antonio. So.
Oh, nice.
So the last question is, and this is probably the most important question we always ask our guests, who is your favorite superhero or historical figure, and why?
Yeah, Brian asked me for a superhero, and I was struggling to find. I have 3 little kids, and they're like, I asked them for opinion, but I ultimately chose a historical figure. I chose Lou Gehrig for a few of those same reasons that I just mentioned about Tim Duncan. Just because, you know, first of all, I grew up as a kid in New York, and I was a big Yankees fan, and like, you know, Lou Gehrig, he showed up. Not only did he show up every day to get that streak, but he was excellent at what he did, and he lived in the shadow of a much bigger personality in Babe Ruth. Yet, you know, if you look at some of Gehrig's stats, like, they're actually more remarkable than a lot of Ruth's stats. And but, you know, and he kept on doing it until such a time that illness prevented him from going on and ultimately took his life. But, you know, if you've seen the movie Pride of the Yankees, he, you know, when it all came to an end, he didn't, you know, kind of complain. He was grateful, and he talked about how blessed he was. And I feel, you know, hopefully just a good lesson to be appreciative of everything that we have.
So you obviously told me this answer, and I looked on eBay and I found Lou Gehrig, and it has the Startup Grind swag on there. So, ladies and gentlemen, Jim Bankoff.